Rather than we learned anything new, because most of it's been covered in the testimony, but we've learned a new facility of interpreting the information that we have. It's so much easier to do it after you've been on the spot.
You were at several spots here. Are you convinced that he was shot from the school book depository?
Well, I think we better leave all that, you know. The evidence report will cover all of that, and we'll get into that. But that question might lead to a lot more. And
are you near the end of your report?
Well, John, what do you think? I think about 2 month more. We hope to finish in a couple of months.
I think possibly we could complete maybe in 2 months, but then we have the report. Myself, I think it'll be a little longer. I think 3 months. We've had Mr. Bell in here with us, too, one of our counsel who's been here several times.
He knows this city now, and very few people do.
Very helpful.
Can you say if you still think it was one man?
I think we leave that.
I think we'd better not get into that area, you know. The report will cover all of that in great detail.
When will the report be made available to the press, or can you say how much of it would be?
Well, I think everything should be made available to the press.
Yes, I'd like to join in that, too, because there's been some speculation that just part of it was. We can assure you that every bit of the testimony will be made available to the press, the public.
And when he got to the corner there, well, he put the gun in his belt like this, and then he walked up the street.
And what did you do?
Well, I ran out to where I was even with him, and then I walked on the opposite side of the street, even with him. When he got to the service station, he went behind it, and I ran over and went behind it too, but I couldn't find it. I looked in the cars, under the cars, I couldn't find him.
Were you actually trying to catch him or just keep up with him?
Just keep up with him.
And what happened then?
Evidently he got away and the police came, and I went on back to work. Well, when I walked in, I went to turn these lights off. I turned these first 2 switches before a man shot me that was hidden right behind me. And then I ran out of the building.
Did you get a look at the man?
Not a good look.
Did you see him to be able to tell anything about him?
No, sir.
Did anybody see?
went to left field, and I just caught a glimpse of him there, and then I didn't see him good enough, so I decided to go on downtown. So of all the places downtown, I picked right in front of that Texas bookstore depository, and stood right in the front of the building, and I saw everything that happened, and that's about all I got to say.
From the
At the request of Jack Ruby, the President's Commission on the Assassination of President Kennedy has today conducted a polygraphic examination. The results, of course, are going to be taken to Washington, and there will be no disclosure of any sort until the Commission has analyzed the examination and come to its own conclusions. And that's all that is stateable for the press and public at this time about this matter.
Why did it take so long?
It took as long as it did because it was a very comprehensive examination, and such an examination to be done in a comprehensive fashion on a matter of this sort required that much time.
How did you feel about this, Mr. Fowler? Were you in favor of this polygraph test?
Gentlemen, I was not in favor of the polygraph test. I so advised the Commission. I advised Mr. Ruby. But as you probably know, Mr. Ruby had made this connection with Chief Justice Earl Warren prior to my entering into the case. And as I understand, Mr. Warren, in keeping with the promise that he made to Jack Ruby to give him a polygraph test, it was carried out by these gentlemen here today.
You feel that this will be hurtful to your field?
Well, let me put it this way. Anything that might lend some credence to show that certainly would not help our cause. I do not feel that anything that went on here today would be detrimental to Jack Ruby's cause.
That is from the respondents.
Well, now, I will not go into his responses. Again, this I'm not prepared to say.
What was the main reason you were against it?
The background of this, as you probably know, we have contended in the past, we will contend in the future, that Mr. Ruby is of unsound mind and is incapable at this time of carrying on and conducting his own affairs. And for this reason, we felt and so advised Mr. Ruby that he should not do this. But he absolutely insisted on it. This was his act, and his act alone. I could have no control whatsoever over Mr. Ruby.
We were under 24-hour police protection, which began on Sunday morning, November 24, after an anonymous tip or call had come through the City Hall switchboard. I understand that a similar call had been picked up at one of the FBI offices out of the state, and that brought them into the picture also. We were under their protection, starting with 4 men on each shift, 3 shifts a day, and that gradually was reduced to 2 men on each shift. And then the worst thing, I think, that naturally shook her up worse than any other, was when on New Year's Eve night, she picked up the phone in the bedroom, and a very well-modulated, mature voice, apparently sober. Do you want to give the quotation on that?
No, you give the quotation.
Well, I'll omit some of the words when he said, "This is the night, a good night to get that blankety-blank mare, and we're going to do it now." A very unusual circumstance occurred immediately following that phone call, because when Ms. Cabell notified one of the officers on duty, he immediately reported to his captain. And then as he started back in the living room where I and our guests were, the lights went out in the front part of the house, and you can imagine what his thoughts were. And though in my ignorance of what was going on, but realizing that a fuse had blown, I grabbed up a flashlight and ran out to the garage, and with both detectives in hot pursuit and shielding me from the open garage door that opened out onto the street. But there were no further incidents to cause any trouble. I was not advised of this call, but immediately sensed, due to the tightening of security, that something had happened. And then I was quite careful not to worry Ms. Cabell, and she was careful not to worry me by telling me about it, so we played cat and mouse all the rest of the evening.
Did they ever find out who made the calls?
We never did. It was not traceable. It was recorded, but we couldn't trace it. With reference to the recent news story concerning your seeing the gun that was poked out the window of the school book depository, you did see it, of course, as we rounded the corner, did you not? This sighting of the actual gun, of course, was reported to proper authorities, and no further mention was made of it. But it just now has leaked out through our very aggressive press, and so there's no use in trying to cover it up anymore.
What's the condition of the governor right now?
Quite satisfactory.
Can you describe the wound and all?
His wounds fell into three categories. The first, a tangential wound of the right side of the chest, which Dr. Shaw can best describe. The second, a compound fracture of the right wrist. And the third, a soft tissue wound of the left thigh.
The main problem in dealing with the wound of the chest was in closing the chest, because the bullet which entered the right shoulder in the back went down across the chest and struck the fifth rib in such a way that it was partially shattered, and this caused an opening through the chest wall into the pleural cavity, which allowed the right lung to collapse. The surgery was just a matter of taking away the damaged tissue caused by both the bullet and the rib fragments, and then closing the chest so that the right lung could be re-expanded. No, it shouldn't be considered critical. His condition is satisfactory considering the wound that he has had.
Considering the path of the bullet through his body, how close did the bullet pass from any vital organs that would likely have resulted in a fatal shot?
The closest vital organ, I suppose, would have been the heart, and it was at least 6 inches away from the heart. In other words, the bullet actually did not enter the body cavity, but it caused an opening into the body cavity by the shock-like impact against the rib, which it fractured. The bullet itself did not enter the body cavity. It only went through the chest wall.
Has the governor been conscious at all?
Yes, the governor has reacted from anesthesia quite satisfactorily now. He is fully conscious. He's mentally alert, talking, and in fact jocular at times at the moment.
Has he had any comment at all on the shooting?
No, we've purposely avoided commenting on
this.
this.
Is he aware that he was shot?
Oh, yes.
Does he know the president is dead?
Not at the moment, no.
Do you know when he'll be told?
Tomorrow, in all likelihood.
Has he had anything to say at all about it?
He's asked questions in a general nature, that's all. Dr. Shaw and I agree, after talking to Mrs. Connally, that it's probably quite fortunate that the governor turned to see what had happened to the president. Had he not, the chances are quite good the path of the bullet would have been straight through and through and would have involved the heart.
I'm Julian Read, R-E-A-D, aide to Governor Connally.
Could you describe the seating position in the automobile?
Yes. The president was seated in the right rear seat. Opposite in the left rear was Mrs. Kennedy. Immediately ahead of the president on a jump seat was Governor Connally. Immediately opposite him was Mrs. Connally. Farther up, of course, we had Secret Service, as you know. As Mrs. Connally recalls, just before they reached the triple underpass, the shot rang out, the first shot, and she feels quite sure that it did hit the president. Governor Connally, who was seated here, turned immediately to see what happened, and as he turned, he was struck. The president, according to Mrs. Connally, immediately slumped, and Mrs. Kennedy grabbed him. A moment later, Governor Connally slumped, and Mrs. Connally grabbed him. Both women grabbed the men almost simultaneously and ducked as much as possible to guard against any possible gunfire following that. Mrs. Connally says that the next thing she recalls is a Secret Service man picking up a telephone in the car and giving instructions of, let's proceed direct to the nearest hospital.